Hi, my name is Stuart and welcome to the Investopoly podcast. My goal is to share easy to understand strategies, insights, and tips to help you master the game of building wealth. And today I want to talk about how to manage the cost of personal insurances. So these are things like income protection, life insurance, total and permanent disability, and trauma cover. The premiums on these products really have risen significantly, I would say, over the last 10 or so years. Now, there's some reasons for that, which I won't go into here. But let's say, for example, income protection insurance, most of the insurers have actually been reporting losses on those products. Anyway, that's another conversation for another day. The point is, for most of us, we need cover. The risk associated with not having the cover is too great. So we want to outsource that risk. And that's really important, right? Of course, when we come up with a financial strategy, one of the key assumptions of any financial strategy is that I'm able to get out of bed tomorrow, go to work, earn an income, which is going to give me borrowing capacity, it's going to give me super contributions, and so on and so forth. Well, obviously, that's a key assumption. Now, if we can't get out of bed tomorrow and go to work, in fact, if we can't work at all for the rest of our life, that's going to have some serious consequences. Our strategy fails. So that's a key risk, and we need to insure against that risk. But of course, there's got to be a cost benefit. The benefit obviously is that I'm no longer taking that risk from a personal perspective, but obviously there's a cost associated with that. And you don't want the cost to be more than, say, what the risk is. Maybe you can self-insure that risk, that is, take that risk. Now, the problem is when we get insurance, quite often we get insurance at a young age, it's very cheap. And then obviously it's a bit insidious in that it continues to increase. The premium rises each year with every birthday, of course. It gets to a point where we wake up one day and all of a sudden we're paying a lot of money, many thousands of dollars on these insurance products. And quite often the gut reaction for most people is just to go and the decision either keep it or cancel it. Very black and white. But typically there's more nuance associated with that decision, and typically making changes to the level of cover over time gradually, and then getting to a point when, if it's safe to do so, cancelling those policies is really the best approach. Now, I think I have a different approach or perspective on insurance than a lot of other financial planners. Financial planners have often been accused of kind of selling too much insurance and convincing their clients to keep it. My view with insurance is, in some circumstances, of course, it's absolutely necessary. In fact, I think you'd be crazy not to have it. But of course, the less we spend on insurance, the more money we have left over to invest. And so, there's that tension there between I need the cover, I want the cover, it's necessary, but I don't want to spend any more than absolutely necessary because that actually impedes my ability to invest. And the more I invest and the stronger my financial position is, the less insurance I need. So I recognize 100% there's a tension there. And my view is, let's have insurance if it's absolutely necessary, but let's take steps to make sure we don't have any more than absolutely necessary. So in the blog on the website, I've got a link to a video that I recorded about 7 years ago. It's pretty ordinary, to be honest, the quality of the video and audio and so forth. A lot better tools out today, and I know whenever I look at something I produced or prepared, that length of time ago, I really hate it. But anyway, it is what it is. I think the theme in the video is okay, and at about the 6-minute and 50-second mark, I talk about the life cycle of insurance needs. And I discuss why younger people with young families tend to be at the sort of peak need of insurance, because during that time, they face a lot of financial responsibilities. They probably have a home loan, and probably a sizable home loan. They've just started the commitment to raising children, which is an expensive little hobby in of itself. And their financial position isn't probably massively strong, typically speaking. And so they tend to be at the sort of peak of their insurance needs. Now, the good thing is, luckily, insurance is relatively cheap when we're younger. So the premiums are relatively low just because I guess the probability of illness is a lot lower as well. And we get a lot of depth of cover. So for example, if I'm 30 and I've got an income protection policy, well, what I'm doing is insuring 30 years of income. And if I'm insuring $10,000 a month or something like that, that's a $3.6 million asset, being $10,000 a month for the next 30 years. pretty sizable asset, right? And if it costs me a couple of grand to insure that asset, that's not bad value because, it probably cost me $1,000 or more to insure my car, and my car might only be worth 70 grand. And if I lost the car, financially it'd be a bit of a hit, but I'd probably recover. If I lost my income for the next 30 years, that's devastating financially and, probably physically and emotionally too, of course. So my view is when insurance is relatively cheap, there's no risk, there's no downside or very little downside to having a full level of cover. My view is when it's cheap, get as much cover as you need. In fact, perhaps even a touch a little more cover. You may as well protect yourself in that situation where it's cost effective. But as you get closer to 50s and certainly in your 50s, insurance starts to increase significantly the premiums. And arguably by that stage, maybe your children are older, perhaps they're getting closer to financial independence, if that ever happens. Your financial position is probably going to be a lot stronger when you're in your 50s. And also the benefit, the amount of income you're insuring, because most income protection policies pay out till age 60, your benefit period is much shorter. So the time that you might receive a benefit, so the asset value is smaller as well. And so arguably in that situation, that makes sense to reduce cover. So it's one of those things in life that, is actually cheaper when you need lots of it and more expensive when you probably should start curbing it back a little bit. But it's important not to get addicted to the level of cover as well, which I find is pretty common. So if I've got a client that's had a certain level of insurance for many years or possibly decades, to then try and convince them that they need to reduce their insurances tends to be quite challenging, which is kind of a little bit weird, I think, because obviously they would certainly acknowledge their financial position is different to when they set up those policies. And of course, if the situation changes, so does the insurance. But anyway, I don't find it that way. So I think it's good if you are in your 30s and 40s, and if you are of a mind to make sure you're well insured, it's good to just make friends with at some point. And hopefully as you approach 50, and certainly when you're in your 50s, the plan would be, all going well, to start reducing cover over that time. Now, just why it's challenging to persuade, someone in their 50s to reduce their insurance cover, it's equally difficult to convince someone, say, in their 30s that have never had insurance that they actually need it. And it could be a little bit of cognitive dissonance going on there because people genuinely want to feel that they're responsible and secure, but if they haven't considered insurance or they've discounted it in the past, then it sort of leads to conflicting beliefs there. Also, there can be a bit of a status quo bias there, as not having insurance has kind of served them to date. If they've been lucky enough to not have an accident or illness and haven't needed the insurance, then they sort of say to themselves, well, it's worked out for me. Now, of course, I'm not a psychologist, but I just find the psychology around these things pretty interesting and in some cases quite surprising. Now, the desire for insurance is heavily influenced by your own personal risk profile. And of course, we're all different. But I think the key thing is to just pose the question to yourself. And that's particularly for people that are inclined not to have cover. And the question is, if you couldn't work for a number of years, if you died, if you were totally and severely incapacitated, what's going to happen? Who's going to look after you? How are you going to fund living expenses and medical treatment? How are you going to look after any dependents, children or your spouse or anything like that? I think it's just important to ask those questions. Now, after you've considered very deeply those questions, you might conclude that I don't really care. It's a risk that I'll deal with, down the road. So be it. It is what it is, right? But at least if you carefully think about these factors now, it's unlikely you're going to regret it later on. It's only when people don't think about these things and then the worst happens, that's when they regret actually not thinking about it a little bit further. So my view is a financial advisor's job is certainly give advice. And where there's situations where the advisor thinks you're taking crazy risk, of course they should say that. But really when it comes to insurance, I think it's really about helping a client discover the level of cover that they're most comfortable with and asking them the right questions. If a client just decides, I don't want insurance, well, it is what it is, so be it. Now, when it comes to managing the cost, I think it's important to make an assessment of which insurance products are probably the most important to most people and offer the most value for money. And if I was to rank them, I would say income protection is 1, life insurance 2, Total and permanent disability insurance is 3, and trauma insurance is at the bottom in number 4 position. So let me just unpack that for you a little bit. Income protection insurance, I think, is the most valuable because it really protects your most valuable asset, which is your ability, as I said, to get out of bed every morning and go and earn an income. And if you're in your 20s, that's the next 40 years of income, for example, or 30s, the next 30 years of income. It's quite substantial and it's quite a substantial asset. And it also covers accident and illness. So, of course, we can assess, I guess, the probability of an illness that's going to be statistically related to our age and our family's medical history. But what we can't really influence is accident. You can cross the road and get hit by a bus. There's not much you can really do about that in terms of managing that risk. Cross the road carefully, of course, but you know what I'm sort of saying. So to my mind, income protection gives you the greatest depth of cover. It's covering your most valuable asset. And statistically, I would argue, let's hope a 30-year-old doesn't drop dead tomorrow. So statistically, I think there's a greater chance of an illness or an accident occurring than hopefully dropping dead. So that's why I think income protection is better or more valuable than life insurance. But life insurance is next on the list because, of course, it's crucial to look after your loved ones and any financial dependents. And so life insurance will go towards, replacing the income that you would have otherwise earned if you were still alive, to cover living expenses, reduce debt, fund children's education, assist with your spouse's retirement plans, make sure they've got enough money to retire at the end of the day. And that's what I'm saying when you've got a young family and maybe you're in your 30s or whatever it might be, having a full amount of life insurance to make sure all those things are fulfilled in the event, of your untimely death, I think it makes sense and it's quite cost effective to do that. Next is total and permanent disability insurance, or TPD insurance. And really, TPD covers a very thin and narrow risk. It covers you in a situation where you're incapacitated and you can't return to work in any capacity. You can't stand in a ticket booth and just issue tickets, for example. I'm not even sure that job exists anymore with technology, of course, but you can't do anything. But you're still alive. So you still need care. People still need to look after you, all those sorts of things. That's the situation where total and permanent disability pays out, kind of like a Michael Schumacher situation. I'm not across, obviously, the specifics of his situation, but what I understand, he's still alive, requires a lot of care, and so on and so forth. In that situation, of course, you're probably almost always going to get an income protection benefit if you have that level of cover. So there's a bit of overlap between income protection and TPD insurance. And the final product is trauma insurance, and I think that's really the most optional, if I can describe it as that. It's an insurance that pays out on diagnosis. You don't have to have any symptoms, just a diagnosis of what's called a specified condition. And normally policies have somewhere between 40 and 50 specified conditions. Statistically, the most common ones are a cancer diagnosis, or cardiovascular disease tends to be more prominent in males, like heart attacks and so forth. And so the idea behind trauma insurance is you get this benefit. I go off to the doctor, I get a cancer diagnosis, I get this benefit paid into my account. I can then take voluntary time off work, maybe go to Germany to pursue medical treatment that's not covered by the PBS, Australian treatment and so forth. And that's what it allows you to do, which is maybe nice to have. You probably don't need heaps of trauma insurance. Sometimes I see people with $500,000, $1 million of trauma cover. To me, I just think that's completely unnecessary in most situations. But of course, if I go and get a cancer diagnosis, I'm probably going to start treatment pretty soon, right? Probably next week. That might be radiology, chemo, whatever it might be. If I'm unable to work fully during that treatment period, which is probably most likely, I can claim on income protection insurance. So again, there's a bit of overlap there between trauma and income protection insurance, and that's why income protection insurance is the most valuable. So of course, if we're looking to save money on insurances as the premiums rise, it makes sense to reduce the cover that poses the least financial risk as possible. And so typically, to my mind, that means reducing trauma cover first, followed by potentially TPD insurance, maybe even life insurance, and typically the income protection cover is the last to change, although I'll get into that in a second. I prefer to gradually reduce the benefit amount rather than just cancel it in totality, to gradually deal with that over time. It's going to depend on, personal circumstances, of course, and the cost associated with it. And everyone's situation is unique, right? So don't take this as gospel. In fact, don't take anything that I say in this podcast as personal advice. So reducing the product or the benefit amount related to the product that's providing you with the least amount of cover is, I think, the first thing. And that sort of goes back to which ones I think are most important in most people's situations. The next thing to think about is the tax effectiveness of the structure. So, obviously maximising your tax deductions minimises the after-tax cost of holding that cover. And so in that regard, premiums for income protection cover are tax deductible when they're owned in our personal name. So I almost always suggest owning income protection in your personal name because that's going to give you the most tax deduction. On the other hand, premiums for life and TPD insurance are not tax deductible if they're held in your personal name. So you get no tax deduction. Whereas if you put them in super, at least they're going to pick up a 15% tax deduction. So generally I like life and TPD insurance inside super. And unfortunately, there's no deduction for trauma insurance regardless of how it's structured. So unfortunately, that's a non-tax deductible expense, which further makes that insurance more costly compared to the others. Now, other than changing the benefit amount, with income protection insurance, there are a few other things you can play with. Now, the only exception to that is with what's called own occupation TPD, which tends to be more appropriate to sort of specific occupations. Quite often, specialist medical practitioners might have own occupation TPD. I'm not a big fan of it because if I'm going to spend more money on insurance, I typically prefer to spend it on income protection insurance rather than own occupation TPD insurance because it's non-tax deductible as well. And I think income protection gives us much deeper cover. But that's just a bit of a side note. Really, what I want to talk about now is other than changing the benefit amount, when it comes to income protection insurance, there's three other things that we can change to change its cost. And it's possible that you can make changes to these things that are going to have a material impact on the insurance premium, so give you a good saving, but not necessarily expose you or your family to much greater risk. Okay, so the first option to think about is the wait period. So the wait period is the duration that you must wait between becoming incapacitated and submitting a claim. And most insurers will have a few different options: 30, 60, 90 days, 180 days, so 6 months, 1 year or 2 years. They tend to be the options, the wait period options. Generally, we find that a 90-day wait period is most cost effective because, what we're worried about for income protection is long-term incapacity. Short-term incapacity doesn't worry us too much because short-term incapacity, the financial impact of that isn't that severe. And, if you break our arm or leg, can't work for a couple of months, we might have a bit of leave, a bit of savings to get us through. We'll be fine. We'll probably recover from that. But if we can't work for 2 or 3 years, that's going to have a more severe impact on our financial position. That's what we really want to protect ourselves against. So a 90-day wait period kind of balances that out. Still protects us, fully protects us from long-term incapacity. But, if we're incapacitated for less than 90 days, okay, that's a risk that we're going to wear. So if you've got a policy that has a 30 or 60-day wait period, and you're looking for some savings, it might be worth asking the insurer to run a couple of quotes to see what the saving might be if you go out to 90 days. In a lot of situations, there's a material saving for that. The next thing to think about is whether your policy is agreed value or indemnity value. So if your policy was established before April 2020, it's possible that you've got an agreed value policy, which isn't available anymore. And I should say, the insurance industry, not just personal insurances, but even building insurance, health insurance, they love to have legacy products. They'll introduce a new product. That new product isn't as good as the old product. And, they work on a bit of loss aversion there that, say, well, you couldn't get this product today. That's the insurance industry. We need to make friends with that. As soon as you take out a new insurance product, it's probably going to be considered an old legacy product. Maybe within only a few days of you taking it out. Anyway, maybe I'm being too cynical in regards to that. But prior to 2020, almost all the income protection policies we used to write and set up for clients were agreed value. And it means that should you come to claim time, that the insurer has to pay you that benefit regardless of what income you were earning prior to you becoming incapacitated. And so agreed value policies were great because it always locked in the benefit. We get what you pay for. But of course, that's been one of the problems with insurance companies managing, the cost of cover and the cost to deliver these products, that now the government has told them, well, back in 2020, you're no longer allowed to write agreed value policies. Everything is indemnity. Now, if you are in a situation where your income's very stable and you expect it to continue to be stable, then the agreed value policy doesn't really give you much more protection because your income's stable anyway. And the indemnity value policy would typically, every policy definition is different, but typically the way they look at it is the highest 12 consecutive month period over the last 2 years, the 2 years prior to you becoming incapacitated, that's what they will use as your income. So it's not just the 12 months prior, but you can go back up to 2 years and pick that highest 12-month consecutive period. So again, if your income is relatively stable, then switching from an agreed value to indemnity value policy doesn't necessarily expose you to much risk, additional risk, but could save you a significant amount of money. And the last option, which I'm not a massive fan of, is a split policy. So many insurers will offer a split policy, which means that most of the policy is owned inside super, and there's a little bit of the policy that's owned outside super to make sure you get a fully comprehensive cover. And it's just related to the superannuation legislation of how that works, because typically cover inside super isn't as comprehensive as cover outside super. The benefit of doing that, of having a split policy, is that most of the premium, typically around 90% of the premiums, paid by super, so it doesn't impact your personal cash flow. Now, that doesn't necessarily save you money per se, because you're still paying the same premium, if you like. So, and we're here to talk about how to save money off insurance. So it's not going to save you money, but it's certainly improve your cash flow position. The other thing, though, also is it's not as tax effective, right? Because 90% of the premiums inside super, which gets a 15% tax deduction, and the 10% that you pay outside, if you've got a reasonable level of income, you're going to be paying a higher tax rate than 15%. So it's not as tax effective by having that split policy. But if you are in the situation where your personal cash flow is really tight and you do need the cover, having a split policy across your super fund might be a really good way of still giving you a full comprehensive cover without it impacting your personal cash flow too much. Now, one of the benefits of having a comprehensive long-term strategy is that as part of preparing that strategy, we prepare financial projections. And so if we know exactly what you need to do over the next 30 years to achieve your financial and lifestyle goals, it's then really easy for us to work out, how sensitive is that strategy to your employment income, for instance. So if we assume that you don't add any income to the strategy, does the strategy still work? And that allows us then to work out, how critical then is income protection insurance. And similarly, if one of the spouses passed away at a certain time, what impact does that have to the strategy? We can put that all into the financial projections and it can tell us. So having that long-term strategy gives us really good context for making these insurance decisions. And the similar approach can be used when reviewing cover. Right, so which we've done many times for clients, where they've got a certain amount of cover and, well, your situation's changed. Here's some projections that assume that you're no longer alive. Here's the level of life insurance we've worked out you need so that your family is looked after. So having that sort of long-term view, I think, is really helpful in making some really good quality educated decisions to, again, make sure we've got enough insurance to make sure we're not exposing ourselves to risk, but no more than that. As the saying goes, insurance is a necessary evil. None of us really like it, but we all acknowledge that we need to have it at certain parts of our life. It's really just about making sure we don't waste any money on cover that we don't need. And hopefully the ideas in this blog have, helped you work out, if you're in that position, what can you change in your situations, or I should say discuss with your insurance advisor some changes that might help you sort of manage that cost throughout your lifetime. Okay, let's get into some listener questions today. So the first one is from Philippa. Philippa writes, my husband and I both work full-time. We have a combined income of $300,000. We currently rent invest. We've built a very robust property portfolio over the last 10 years, which consists of 5 properties worth around 900 to 1.2 each. The loans on each are about the same, about 600,000. So we have 5 mil of assets and 3 mil of debt, which costs us around $50,000 negative cash flow or 10K per property. These loans are interest only. We have $500,000 of savings and we plan to buy our primary place of residence this year for $1.6 million. The mortgage broker says they can lend us $1.2, so we can put down $400,000 plus spend $80,000, I should say, on stamp duty. P&I repayments on this loan is about $150,000 a year. We think we're flying too close to the sun. The repayments are about 50% of take-home pay, and if we have to keep our properties, we don't think we can sleep at night. So our plan is to sell one. Question is whether we sell the worst performing asset worth $900,000. We think that past performance will replicate into the future. Or do we sell the best performing asset, thinking mean reversion will cause underperformance in the future 10 to 15 years? That's a great question, Philippa. Firstly, congratulations to you and your husband. You've done incredibly well over the last 10 years to build a substantial asset base that, if it compounds, as we hope it will, over the next few decades, will put you in a absolutely fantastic financial position. So a lot of hard work over the last 10 years, and congratulations getting to that point. To answer your question, it's a really easy one for me. You'd sell the worst performing asset. When it comes to looking at a property portfolio and when I've got to divest of an asset for exactly these reasons, for instance, I mean, there's many reasons we might want to do that or need to do that, but these reasons are a good example. So that is to be able to, get ourselves into a position where we're quite comfortable with our debt exposure. And again, Philippa, well done on thinking about these things and making sure you've got manageable sort of debt levels, because I think, putting yourself into a position that's going to cause you a lot of stress or potentially get you into trouble is certainly not worth taking. So when we're in these positions, it's absolutely having consideration to which of these assets do we think will contribute the least amount to our financial future. So you definitely sell the worst performing asset or the asset that we think is going to underperform. Now, you're right. If you've had an asset that's really benefited from substantial growth, you're right. It's possible that the next few years, 5, 10, 15, whatever it might be, might result in underperformance. But also, it's possible that the market still has time left to run. So you just never really know when the peak of the market is, and markets can run higher and higher much longer than we might originally expect. Plus also, my idea is, in your situation, I don't know your ages, but in your situation, my idea would be, well, I'm going to hang on to these properties really forever, with no necessary timeline in terms of selling them. Now, however you thought you might need to sell another property in 10 years' time, then maybe selling that best performer might be okay, although I'd still be reluctant to do it. So the other things to think about, though, are capital gains tax. Having a careful think about that. Of course, if you're selling your best performing asset, you'll probably pay more capital gains tax. I'm not against it, but it's just one of those things I would consider. And then the other thing would be, how much equity will you walk away with? So how much debt will you reduce? Although I think you said the loan on each of these properties is of a similar amount, so the answer should be relatively similar as well. But again, well done, Philippa. Great position. Thanks so much for your question. Okay, next question is from Ather. Ather writes, I find myself in a pickle and would greatly appreciate your insights. Here's the scenario. In 2015, we purchased a primary place of residence in Sydney's southeast suburbs, 4-bedroom home, 2 bath, 2 garage on 600 square metres for around $800,000. After residing there for 3 years, my family and I decided to relocate close to the city due to our dissatisfaction with the area. Consequently, we are renting out our primary place of residence and have been living in a rental property ever since. Now, as the 6-year primary place of residence rule approaches, we are uncertain about our future plans regarding the Sydney property. Additionally, we have an investment property in Brisbane that has performed reasonably well. Here are the 2 options we are considering. First, Build a granny flat on the Sydney property to generate additional cash flow to aid loan servicing and invest in another property. Number 2, sell the Sydney property and use the proceeds to purchase a primary place of residence in a location we prefer. However, given the challenges with pricing our desired area, finding a suitable property might prove challenging. I'm torn between these two options and would love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you're in my situation? Any feedback or advice would be immensely appreciated. Well, Atha, it's a great question and thanks for submitting it. I think let's look at the first option, building a granny flat. The only time I would seek to make additional improvements to an existing dwelling is if I thought the underlying land value was going to appreciate significantly. In which case, I've done a few podcast episodes about, just buy land value, buy land in the highest quality location you can. And then after you've purchased the property, then think about improving the property's cash flow, so income profile. Don't think about or don't consider or be persuaded by the income profile of a particular asset before you buy it. And so in that situation, if I had a great asset that is in a great situation and I just wanted to improve the income profile, absolutely, I'll put a granny flat on there and try and generate as much income from that asset as possible. But in this situation, all you're doing is making what sounds like to me, because I don't know the details, of course, only what you've told me, what sounds like to me is a dud asset. If it's a dud asset and if it's a mistake, then when you find yourself digging a hole, stop digging. And so the key question I would ask you is, if you had your time again back in 2015, would have you bought this asset? I suspect from what you've written to me, the answer would be no. If the answer is no, then it's a mistake. Let's fix the mistake rather than throw more good money after bad. Now, I hear you in terms of the prices being challenging in your desired location. That's today in 2024. If you don't go and sell the Sydney property, your primary place of residence in the southwest, if you don't do that today, and you delay it another 4 to 5 years, I bet it's going to be even more challenging to get into your desired location. So I would sell the Sydney property and then I would do whatever I could to buy the highest quality asset as close to the desired area as possible. Even if that meant I'm leaving room for in the future to improve that asset, so be it. So what I'm saying there is maybe you've got to compromise in terms of accommodation size or style or finish to try and get into the area or as close to the area where you want to live. And then hopefully in a few years' time, you'll be able to renovate or improve that property to get something that's more desirable that you'd look at today. So that's the approach I would take with that asset. There's never a bad time to buy a great property asset, I think. And there's also almost never a bad time to sell a terrible property asset. If they're no good, let's move them on. Let's correct that mistake and get ourselves into a position so that when we look back in, say, 20 years' time, you look back at 2024 and go, well, lucky I got rid of that asset. Otherwise, I'd never be able to afford where I'm living today, which is a common comment I hear, and it really is true. Anyway, thanks everyone so much for your questions. If you have any questions or feedback, you can email me at questions@investopoly.com.au. For the next couple of weeks, I'll do some more Q&A style episodes, try and get through these questions. I think they're very interesting and I hope you all enjoy them. And until next week, bye for now.